Focus on Headline. All right, let's take a look at what major issues are making the headlines today on Focus on Headline. For this, joining us in the studio today, we have our reporters Kwon So-ah and Yoon Se-young. Guys, welcome back.
Hi, guys. Good afternoon.
We're going to start
good evening.
What did I hear? I didn't even hear what you said.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon.
I mean, technically, it is afternoon. Technically. I mean, it is evening, but it is also afternoon as well.
I was so excited.
And you know what? And there might be some other parts of the world where it is afternoon. So
Speaking of other parts of the world, SJ, can you pronounce the new coach's name again for Korea's football team?
It's a test.
Jürgen Klinsmann. Klinsmann.
Okay, great.
Yes.
Thank you.
What did I say? It's a Klinsmann, right? That's the
it should be a long E sound.
Yeah, because the American pronunciation is Jürgen Klinsmann, right? Because he also was the head coach for the men's U.S. national football team, and so, but nevertheless, we're very happy to have Klinsmann join us in our Guten Tag. Maybe we'll talk about it later in our program during Global Now. But for now, we're going to start things off with some domestic politic news. Obviously, one of the bigger news this week here, we had the parliamentary members barely voting against the arrest motion for Democratic Party leader Lee Jae-myung over corruptions. The ambience, obviously, over at the Democratic Party is far from cheerful joy, as we did see a surprisingly large number of DP members voting for the arrest motion for Lee Jae-myung. Obviously, showing there are some rifts within the party in itself, not everyone in the same page. I did mention yesterday that maybe some of them are looking into next year's general elections. Maybe Lee Jae-myung is becoming a liability for the party. Nevertheless, the ruling People Power does see that Lee's political career may be nearing its end, despite the fact that they didn't get necessarily what they wanted. So you have the reactions.
Right. It was not a surprise that Lee's arrest has been rejected in the vote at the National Assembly Monday, following the prosecution's recent motion to arrest the DP chairman on a series of corruption and bribery charges because the DP has the majority of seats at Parliament. What the surprise, however, is that the vote was an unexpectedly close one in favor of Lee. Quickly, for those who might have missed the news, of 297 lawmakers, 139 supported the arrest request, 138 opposed it, 9 abstained, and 11 votes were considered invalid, meaning there was quite a number of DP members that wanted to see their leader arrested. The Democratic Party, as well as Lee himself, could not hide their shock. Lee got together with party leaders after the result, vowing for more communication between the members of the party in the future. However, the undeniable divide within the party seems to have been confirmed through this vote. DP lawmaker Park Bom-gye said on a radio show that in the case the prosecution requests another arrest warrant, a transparent discussion must be held among the DP members for a decision at the party level. Lee Sang-min, a DP member known to be critical of Lee Jae-myung, also was on radio, and he said, the number of votes that were casted is just the tip of the iceberg, claiming there were many lawmakers that felt uncomfortable with having to shield Lee, which also is in line with another member who spoke on anonymity, saying the results reflect worries that the legal issues evolving around Lee could have negative effects on the DP's parliamentary elections next year.
So there's probably two things in the minds of the DP members who probably voted in favor of the arrest motion. Number one, the most recent one being the presidential election last year. Lee Jae-myung, of course, the similar corruption charges, probably one of the main reasons, if not the main reasons, for why he lost to now President Yoon Suk-yeol. There was a lot of voters who were saying, we're not, too sure with all these corruption charges kind of clouding over them that we want to vote for Lee Jae-myung. The other thing that I think the DP members are looking into is, if you remember the Cho-guk incident, where they were saying that the Moon administration kind of shielding Cho-guk as the justice minister for longer than they should have kind of tainted the image of the Democratic Party, and the voters kind of swayed away from the DP because of that incident. And so now, again, they're afraid that with the general election coming up next year, and this being the big thing, you have the ruling party in the presidential office, you want at least the National Assembly, as they do right now, seeing that it was half in the presidential elections, many of them probably do see Lee Jae-myung as a liability. And a lot of people are probably saying, not just, I think political party members, but many pundits are saying that this might actually be a sign of the end of Lee Jae-myung and his political career. But let's talk about the reactions from the People Power Party this time.
Right. It was quite the pleasant surprise for the ruling party, despite the arrest warrant motion has been nullified. The People Power Party called Monday's results a, quote, political death sentence for the DP leader. The narrow escape from arrest is regarded as the de facto consent towards Lee having to go behind bars. PPP floor leader Suh Hoon, during an interview on radio this morning, said despite the rejection, he thought there were still many decent opposition lawmakers that were trying to restore a healthy political atmosphere. After yesterday's vote, Suh had called on Lee to step down. Chung Eui-young, head of the PPP's policy committee, urged for Lee to apologize to the public and take responsibility for his charges.
Yeah, I think, again, that was a big thing. I think it was no surprise that the motion was voted down. But I think the big surprise was that the difference in one vote. And I don't think the significance of this is the National Assembly voting against the arrest motion of Lee Jae-myung. The bigger significance is that there was only a difference of one vote. And so, he might have avoided the arrest motion, but I think there's bigger issues at hand right now. So now, with this right now, okay, so now he's going to be the prosecution's attempt to arrest Lee Jae-myung. This is going to be put on hold for now because, again, I mean, say what you want. The result says whatever difference it might be, the National Assembly has voted against the arrest motion. But, how do pundits predict the future movements of the prosecution? Because it doesn't seem like they're going to end it now. They'd be like, all right, well, you guys voted, and despite the fact that it was a one-vote difference, we'll stop now because this is probably a start of another thing to come here.
Right. The prosecution's initial attempt to arrest DP chief Lee Jae-myung and its plan to continue its investigation into the Wire Newtown and Daejang-dong development projects were put on hold for now as the National Assembly rejected the motion seeking parliamentary consent for arresting Lee. Now, with Monday's voting result, prosecutors are expected to respond in two different ways. First, the prosecution may choose to indict Lee without physical detention after reinforcing its investigation. Second, the prosecution may complete the remaining investigations, including the alleged illegal transfer of money to North Korea and the corruption in Baekhyun-dong and Jeongja-dong development, and request additional arrest warrants. Either way, the prosecution is expected to continue to take firm stance in requesting an arrest warrant for DP leader Lee Jae-myung. And when the arrest motion was rejected, the Seoul Central District Prosecutor's Office criticized the National Assembly's decision, claiming that there were sufficient amount of reasons for arrest, but due to the Parliament's voting result, we lost the opportunity to proceed with the court's interrogation of the arrest warrant. It also added that the prosecution will reinforce and strictly conduct an investigation into pending issues to find out the truth, once again reflecting its strong will to continue its investigation into Lee.
Yeah, and so this again is going to push then the DP lawmakers to further stray away from Lee Jae-myung. And as long as there's more pressure on Lee Jae-myung, I mean, there's also a higher chance that Lee Jae-myung will eventually step down as the leader of DP here. Mm-hmm. But we have to understand, then let's kind of move on here. How does the National Assembly that holds the key to the votes here, again, they have the majority there, predict the possibility of passing an additional arrest warrant for Lee if the prosecution requested with further allegations of bribery and corruption in the near future then?
Well, although the prosecution's attempt to arrest Lee was defeated in a parliamentary vote this time, again, it was very narrow and Lee barely avoided arrest. And it was completely different from the initial expectations of the Democratic Party and its leadership, who predicted overwhelming vote margins. And with this result, now the possibilities of additional arrest warrant is being discussed seriously within the National Assembly as well. And if that happens, some argue that this time the atmosphere surrounding the vote on arrest motion for Lee may be quite different from the previous one. They say more people will vote to approve Lee's arrest. For the main opposition Democratic Party, if they reject the arrest warrant again next time, they will have to carry a very heavy political burden. And that's because they've already rejected the Representative Noh Young-min's arrest motion in December last year. And with the DP leader Lee Jae-myung's case, the party will end up rejecting 3 arrest warrants in total before next year's general election. On the other hand, however, some pundits say since Monday's voting result heavily disappointed DP supporters, well, indeed, the supporters are already having a heated debate on who voted in favor, who voted to reject, who abstained. It may result in unfavorable results in general elections for DP next year. And for that reason, some say next time when the prosecution seek an additional arrest warrant for Lee, the Democratic Party will unite more to attract its supporters again. Well, not only for the DP members, but also for the prosecution, it's not an easy decision to seek another arrest warrant for a huge political figure like Lee Jae-myung. The prosecution will also need to take risk of being criticized by the public for its possible political intervention ahead of the general election and for issuing arrest warrant with different allegations until its request is finally accepted.
Yeah, so there's 2 sides of the story right now. Are the prosecution going to take another stab and try to send another arrest motion but at the same time risk, like you said, Seung, if the prosecution gets involved with another arrest motion for Lee Jae-myung, then it's going to sound like it's going to be political retaliation, politically motivated, because they might be saying, well, with President Yoon Suk-yeol and his link to the prosecution, is this what the goal of the prosecution is to side with President Yoon Suk-yeol at the same time. But I think also the consensus is that some of the pundits were saying that if the prosecution is willing to take that risk and still put up another arrest motion and then the National Assembly has to set up another vote, then in that case, probably the second time around for Lee Jae-myung, the more Democratic Party lawmakers will probably vote in favor of the arrest motion because they just can't continue to shield Lee Jae-myung with a large number of these allegations that are surfaced, or has already surfaced, but of course they continue to tackle this. And again, this whole idea that next year, April 2024, April, the general election, that's the big thing right now. And so you cannot overlook the voters and how they're going to, of course, see this. We're going to move on here to another issue here. This also has been receiving a ton of attention since the launch of the Yoon Suk-yeol administration last year. We're looking at 4 senior officials from the previous Moon Jae-in administration indicted this Tuesday over alleged connections to forced repatriation of 2 North Korean fishermen back in 2019. So, fill us in.
Right. So those 4 figures are Chung Eui-young, former National Security Advisor and Foreign Minister, Noh Young-min, former Presidential Chief of Staff, Suh Hoon, former Chief of the National Intelligence Service, and Kim Yeon-chul, former Unification Minister. They were indicted without detention, according to the Seoul Central Prosecutor's Office this Tuesday. Their charges include abuse of authority under the National Intelligence Service Act. So a quick look back on the controversial issue. 2 North Korean fishermen back in November 2019 were deported by the South Korean government despite their wish to stay or defect to the South. The Moon administration's reason was that they confessed to have killed 16 North Korean colleagues on their boat. So what the 4 top officials of the previous government are being suspected of is that they exercised their power against South Korean laws and procedures that need to give these men a chance to defect to South Korea, because South Korea's constitution recognizes North Koreans just as they recognize South Korean citizens. They allegedly forced officials at government agencies in obstructing the fishermen from their wish of fleeing to the south. Suh Hoon, former NIS chief in particular, is being accused of giving orders to delete official records that stated the North Koreans' desire to defect to the south.
So, this was one of those incidents where if you do one thing, you'll be in trouble. They'll probably, I'm pretty sure they're going to get you for. If you do the other, you'll get, they decided they were going to repatriate the 2 North Korean fishermen who, again, confessed apparently that have killed 16 North Korean colleagues on their boat. But let's say if the Moon administration, the 4 officials that we talked about, they didn't repatriate the two North Korean fishermen, then they'll say, well, you potentially put a risk at the citizens of South Korea by harboring these two potential killers and things like that. So it's one of those things. Again, we'll see what the results of this is, because this is going to be an ongoing, investigation and issue that we're going to cover on our program here. In the meantime, South Korea reaffirming that Seoul and Washington are pushing for additional joint drills to strengthen their ability to implement the extended deterrence. South Korea also emphasized that such drills will not only encompass military exercises, but also diplomatic and economic responses against North Korea's provocations. Hey, let's get more on this.
South Korean ambassador to the United States, Cho Tae-yong, made the remarks on Monday local time during a meeting with reporters in Washington, D.C., following the 8th Deterrent Security Committee tabletop exercise last week. Cho said practical progress is being made to strengthen Washington's extended deterrence measures for Seoul, referring to the U.S. using the full range of its military capabilities, including nuclear weapons. He also said that a broader follow-up exercise will also be continued in the near future, covering not only military but also diplomatic and economic responses to protect Seoul from security threats. Cho, at the same time, repeatedly condemned North Korea's continued missile provocations despite its serious food shortage, and urged Pyongyang to return to the negotiations. And he also stressed that North Korea's provocations will only lead to further international sanctions and strengthen the Seoul-Washington alliance, which is going to be threatening to North Korea. Regarding economic security, Ambassador Cho said, since President Yoon Suk-yeol took office, various activities have continued to expand and strengthen Seoul-Washington economic alliance, which includes technology alliance along with conventional military alliance. Then, recognizing the public concerns, he said the Korean government is pursuing close dialogue between two countries, keeping a close eye on pending issues that will affect South Korea's economy, such as the U.S. CHIPS and Science Act and the Inflation Reduction Act. Regarding the issue of the U.S. automaker Ford setting EV battery factory plan with China's battery maker CATL, which bypasses the intent of the IRA, and the economic impact it will bring to South Korean companies, he said the South Korean government strongly raised the issue to the U.S.
In the meantime, while emphasizing strong security cooperation between Seoul and Washington, both countries at the same time also stressed that the door to dialogue with Pyongyang is still opened. We've heard this quite a bit. What's the latest on this?
Well, Cho added that the government will continue its unwavering efforts to create an environment in which North Korea has no choice but to return to dialogue. Although it talks about dialogue, the phrase no choice but to return to dialogue reflects Seoul's firm stance, and it's highly likely to continue to take a hawkish stance against Pyongyang that will, according to South Korean government, eventually lead North Korea to come back to the negotiating table. And the United States is in a similar position. The U.S. State Department spokesman Ned Price on Monday condemned North Korea's statement, which accused the U.S. of a hostile policy and vowed future U.S. moves will prompt a quick response, and said it was North Korea that threatened security and refused diplomacy with unprecedented provocations. Nevertheless, Washington also added that it has no hostile intentions against Pyongyang and that it hopes for unconditional dialogue.
Yeah, again, I mean, it's like one of those things where both sides just don't trust each other, right? I mean, U.S. and South Korea is not going to invade North Korea. But North Korea doesn't, feel that way, and they're going to continue on with their provocations. And also because U.S. doesn't trust North Korea, they're not going to remove these sanctions first, and that's the reason why we have the standoff right now, where none of the three sides. Now it used to be two sides, now three sides, because the current administration right now very hawkish against North Korea related issues. So now you have a three-way standstill. Well, no side is going to give up anything right now, which is why there's just no dialogue at this time. Why I thought that recent article by one of the former U.S. lawmakers, I think it was, saying that maybe U.S. should look into sanctions relief first might be a good way to start dialogue once again. I've mentioned this before, but of course the Biden administration is not going to go into that. In the meantime, the U.S. maintaining its designation of North Korea as a state sponsor of terrorism. This according to a recently released report. So tell us more about this.
Right. It's a recently published report, but actually one that states the designation of such in 2021, 2 years ago. But yes, the so-called Country Reports on Terrorism 2021 has been just released on Monday local time by the U.S. State Department. It stated North Korea repeatedly provided support for acts of international terrorism being connected to assassinations abroad. The department cited the case of 4 Japanese Red Army members sought by the Japanese government for their involvement in a 1970 hijacking of Japan Airlines, who continue to seek refuge in the North as evidence that the North has not taken action to address historical support for acts of international terrorism. It went on to say that the Japanese government was still trying to find out the fate of many Japanese citizens who were allegedly kidnapped by the North in the 1970s and 1980s. North Korea was added to the list of states that sponsor terrorism since 2017 after Kim Jong-nam, the half-brother of North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, was murdered in Malaysia by North Korean agents. Now, other countries that are on this list include Cuba, Iran, and Syria.
In the meantime, the South Korean government recently decided to tighten export controls against Russia for obvious reasons, marking, I guess, just over a little over a year since the Russian invasion of Ukraine. In response to this, Moscow saying that South Korea's unfriendly behavior will affect the bilateral relations between the two countries, especially when the bilateral cooperation is needed to deal with North Korean issues. From what I understand, Russia continues to veto at the UNSC, and I don't think they've really been involved with any of the talks recently. But Seo-young, nevertheless, tell us more about this.
Yes, asked by reporters on Monday regarding South Korea's additional sanctions, Russian Foreign Ministry spokesman Maria Zakharova said South Korea made such decision under the direction of the U.S. and it's very disappointing. Basically, he criticized South Korea for not being able to make an independent decision. As you mentioned, Asay, he also said that if South Korea takes this unfavorable stance against Russia, it could also have a negative impact on resolving the North Korea nuclear issues. South Korea decided to join international sanctions against Russia in March last year, shortly after Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and has since been included in 48 unfriendly countries designated by Russia. And major Western countries such as the U.S. and the European Union have also imposed additional sanctions on Russia as the war enters into its second year. And South Korea also announced Friday that it will expand the number of items that require government permission to export to Russia and Belarus from 57 to 798.
Now, of course, while ties with Russia are souring amid the war in Ukraine, South Korea bolstering its cooperation with the U.S., and it looks like in regards to arms-related support for Ukraine. Tell us more about this, Soa.
Right. Although South Korea mentioned on numerous occasions that it can't and won't provide arms for Ukraine directly, the government tries to help out in other ways as much as it can. According to a spokesperson at Seoul's defense ministry this Tuesday, the ministry is aware that negotiations on the export of ammunition between Korean companies and the U.S. Defense Department are underway. So this is kind of a confirmation of reports that said Washington is seeking to import ammunition from South Korea to support Ukraine. And this was actually a reply to a question that had been made at the briefing at the Defense Ministry today on what the Defense Ministry's position was on the request of the Ukrainian ambassador to Korea to discuss the introduction of weapons with the South Korean Defense Ministry or the Defense Acquisition Program Administration the previous day. The ambassador on Monday had renewed Ukraine's hope for Korea to provide lethal weapons. The presidential office this Tuesday reaffirmed Seoul's stance that it's impossible to provide weapons to Ukraine. An official told Yonhap News Agency on Tuesday that there won't be a change in South Korea's position, adding it's a matter that needs extra caution.
Yeah, and so, I mean, we've already seen this sort of happen. I believe Canada was one of the countries that was doing this, and I think Poland might be doing this as well, where they're basically buying ammunition from South Korea, and then, it's one of those things where once you sell it and, they're free to do whatever they want with that. And Canada, I believe, was sending then that ammunition over to Ukraine. So technically, then in that case, South Korea would be avoiding sort of the political, rift with Russia, and they're not technically supplying directly to Ukraine the lethal weapons. But South Korea is still very much firm on not directly shipping lethal weapons to Ukraine. Staying with diplomacy, China's foreign ministry criticizing South Korean Foreign Minister Park Jin-'s remark that said stability on the Korean Peninsula should be maintained in the event of an emergency in the Taiwan Strait. And China said external interference, which, by the way, is a terminology they use quite a bit, on Taiwan won't be tolerated. Seung, you have more on this.
Yes, a Chinese foreign ministry spokeswoman on Monday said in a regular briefing, if South Korea wants to preserve peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula, it must respect China's sovereignty, adhere to one China policy, and deal with Taiwan issues very carefully, basically warning against meddling in China's diplomatic affairs. In an interview with CNN reported on last Wednesday, South Korean Foreign Minister Park Jin said Korea opposes unilateral changes in the status quo by force and added, if anything happens in the Taiwan Strait, South Korea will take position that will maintain peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula. And along with putting additional sanctions against Russia, some analysts say that the South Korea now has decided to end strategic ambiguity related to the Taiwan issue and go with U.S. strategy. And China also chose to respond directly to Korea's fixed stance. For example, China mentioned the move to normalize the THAAD base in South Korea last month.
In the meantime, on Monday, 2 days before the lifting of the COVID-19 PCR test requirements for all inbound travelers from China, none of the short-term foreigners from China actually tested positive for COVID-19. Seung, tell us more about this.
Yes, according to the Central Disease Control Headquarters on Tuesday, 190 short-term foreigners out of 2,114 people who left China and arrived at Incheon International Airport the day before took a PCR test at the airport inspection center, and 190 people out of 2,114 people took the test, and none of them tested positive for COVID. And the cumulative infection rate from January to February is now 5.6%. And accordingly, South Korean government will lift the COVID PCR test requirements for travelers from China starting from March 1st. But the pre-arrival test requirement and Q-code requirement will remain in place until March 10th.
Okay, so a total of 2,114 people were sort of considered foreign travelers coming into South Korea. Of them, 190 of them were short-term foreigners from China. And none of them tested positive for COVID-19 through the PCR test. And you would kind of wonder, right? Like if China had lifted their, zero COVID-19 policy a lot earlier, just like some of the other countries that, we would have never went through all these political fiasco and stuff like that. But China was kind of firm on their belief in the zero COVID policy there, which ultimately led to their economy, collapsing a little bit longer than it should have. In other news, South Korean Foreign Minister Park Jin having met with families of the victims of Japan's wartime forced labor this Tuesday to share words on the compensation consultation underway with Japan. So what do we know about the updates there?
Right. We've been reporting on Seoul and Tokyo's continued negotiations on how to compensate Koreans forced into labor by Japanese companies during World War II. While Seoul's top court had come to the conclusion years ago that Japan is responsible for paying damages to the victims, Tokyo had continuously refused. So the recent compromise the two governments seem to have been agreeing on was a third-party foundation that would raise a fund to compensate the victims. So this was one of the main issues Park probably talked with the victims' families today. Foreign Minister spokesperson Im Soo-seok said Park met with the families to, quote, sufficiently explain the government's diplomatic efforts to come up with a reasonable solution. Park, when arriving at the meeting venue, told told reporters that he aims to listen to the families' voices to find a desirable solution. While the government had continuously communicated with those involved, in many cases individually, it was said to be the first meeting with almost all families in attendance. They included victims who worked for Nippon Steel and Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, the firms that were ordered to compensate the victims.
Again, I mean, there's always going to be a lot of question marks clouding this whole thing because, again, I mean, we learned, I think the governments or South Korea overall, they learned a lot from the previous 2015 so-called comfort women deal, which was blasted, right? Because it was only done between the governments and not involving the victims themselves. And so now this time, of course, they're going to try to get the families of the victims of the wartime forced labor involved with this as much as possible. But to be honest with you, as long as the Japanese companies aren't willing to compensate the victims there, I think this is one of those things where it's going to go nowhere once again.
It's a similar picture to years ago, I think. Even back then, the government did hold discussions with the victims, but I think right now they're doing the same, but the victims continue to just reiterate their stance that they want an apology from Japan.
Yeah, because, I mean, depending on which media outlet's covering it, they're sort of making it sound like as if the victims kind of hold back longer, that they'll get more money. But it's not about the money thing here. It's about who's compensating it, right? And I think the biggest fault, and even I think the South Korean public's also said quite a bit in regards to this as well. Why are Korean companies getting involved with the compensation when it should be the Japanese companies, or at least the Japanese government that should be compensating most, or if not all, of the compensation? And by Nippon Steel and Mitsubishi Heavy Industries not getting involved with the compensation, it's literally just saying that we refuse to apologize, right? And so I think doubled, kind of two-track here. You want, not just the proper compensation, but you also want the apology. But you're only seeing compensation. And because the two companies involved are not compensating, there's no apology whatsoever. And this is shameful, I think, in my opinion. Let's move on here. Really concerning is what's happening over in Turkiye. We've talked about the fact that after the February 6th earthquake, which killed tens of thousands of people in both Turkey and Syria, we talked about these aftershocks. We've also talked about fresh earthquakes. Well, again, on this Monday, we had a 5.6 magnitude earthquake in a similar region in Turkey, killing one person, injuring over 100 others. This happened just 3 weeks after that deadly earthquake that we've talked about extensively on our program. There was another fresh earthquake not too long ago, I believe a week or two ago. Sian, let's get the latest on this.
Sure. A magnitude 5.6 earthquake struck the Yezhirt in Malatya province, southeastern region of Turkey on Monday. And like you said, it killed one person and injured over 100 others. And according to Turkish authorities, more than 9,000 aftershocks have followed so far. And the citizens' anger against the government are now growing as the restoration work is delayed due to the continued collapse of the buildings. Plus, the Turkish government seems helpless despite continuing aftershocks. For Yezhirt, it was the fourth time experiencing earthquakes in the past 3 weeks, as well as over 10,000 aftershocks. So there should have been better ways to be prepared for another earthquake, and the government should have done something in advance. And Workers' Party members also took to the streets to protest against the government and confront police, but Turkish authorities are only blaming the weather conditions and constructors. Meanwhile, the earthquake that hit Turkey this month caused $34 billion of damage, according to the World Bank.
Yeah, and the scary thing about this is the $34 billion that's only based on the damage done by the two earthquakes on February 6th. And so we didn't take into consideration the recent one, and I believe there was another earthquake about a week ago, I believe. That 6 point something, right? And so we didn't even take that into consideration. They're saying this is just the cost of damage, right? So in order to go into the recovery and the reconstruction, they're saying it's probably going to be double that, something like $68 billion. And they didn't even put into calculation Syria. I believe Syria's damage report is going to come out. It should probably come out in a few hours. They said that Tuesday local time. And so even that, we have no idea, right? And so this is, and you have to take into consideration how many more earthquakes are going to follow up with this. And I know that the Turkish people are very frustrated with the government response to this, but not trying to play the devil's advocate, it is very tough to continue with the recovery process when there are these continuous earthquakes going on. And at the same time, all the citizens, every time there's even a little bit of tremor, they go outside, leaving the buildings, fear that there's another major earthquake. So I've seen earthquakes happen in the past, but I've never seen an incident where there's so many earthquakes in such a short period of time. And it's devastating. It really is devastating right now. Yang says it reminds me of the 상품 백화점 and the 성수대교 accidents, which I think that it wasn't related to natural disasters, right? Like the 상품 department store was because some of the people were overlooking some of the structural damages, and the Seongsu Bridge was also a structural damage. It wasn't really a natural disaster, but there were some people, I believe, arrested because of lack of, I guess, overlooking certain inspections and things like that. Nevertheless, guys, as always, thank you very much for your report today. Please stay safe, and we'll see you guys again.
Thank you.
You can listen to Korea Now with me, SJ Lee, by downloading the Arirang Radio application or tune in online by visiting www.arirangradio.com. So make sure you tune in Mondays through Fridays, 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. Korea time.